Chapter 1, The Weakest Princess. The galaxy did not take humans seriously. At the interstellar convergence, ambassadors from 62 species gathered under crystalline domes suspended in orbit above Zetri's prime. Every empire displayed its banners and warriors, armored champions with claws, plasma cannons, and fangs sharpened to razors. Then, the humans arrived. Their representative was a young woman in silk robes so delicate they looked stolen from a dollhouse. Princess Elara of House Viridian, the so-called weakest royal bloodline in known space. She tripped on the first stair. A ripple of laughter spread through the amphitheater. The insectoid Grylth clicked their mandibles in mock applause. The reptilian Vargari hissed amusement, their scaled shoulders trembling. Even the amphibian Saurolans, famed for their stoicism, allowed the corners of their wide mouths to twitch. Elara brushed imaginary dust from her gown and straightened, her cheeks pink. "Forgive me. Gravity and I are still negotiating terms." A few chuckles bubbled from the human delegation behind her. The aliens, however, smirked with open disdain. "Pathetic," muttered General Zurak of the Vargari, his voice a low rasp. "The humans send a porcelain doll to a summit of predators." Elara smiled sweetly at him as she took her place at the table. "And yet porcelain lasts centuries when handled correctly, General. I wonder if your empire can say the same." The room fell quiet for half a breath. The barb had been cloaked in civility, but its edge cut deep. Zurak's scaled eyelids narrowed. Elara pretended not to notice, busying herself with adjusting her sleeves. The Saurolan Chancellor leaned toward his aide. "Humans always joke when threatened. It is disarming." "Or desperate," the aide whispered. They weren't entirely wrong. Elara played the part of the clumsy girl because the galaxy expected nothing else. Her smile was polite, her tone light, her manner seemingly oblivious. But behind her soft eyes, she catalogued everything: guard rotations, hidden weapons, the way each envoy tapped claws, tails, or tentacles when irritated. Her mind, sharpened by decades of tactical study, clicked like clockwork. She had been underestimated her entire life. She had learned to make it a weapon. The summit proceeded with grand speeches. Alien leaders flaunted power, threatening rivals with fleets and ancient technologies. Humanity was dismissed repeatedly. They were newcomers, weak stock, a species too fragile to survive without allies. Elara sipped her tea calmly, though the brew was strong enough to corrode alien metals. When an insectoid delegate sneered at her cup, she tilted her head. "You disapprove?" she asked pleasantly. "That liquid would kill a Grylth instantly," the insectoid replied. Elara's lips curved. "Curious. We call it breakfast." The alien recoiled. Around the chamber, a murmur of unease stirred. For the first time, the laughter thinned. Then came the ceremony of the dragon seals. The dragons were not myth. They were biomechanical titans forged by an extinct race, colossal winged guardians slumbering within cryovaults for millennia. Tradition dictated that when awakened, they would kneel to the strongest warrior present, binding their fire to worthy masters. No one expected the dragons to stir for humanity. The Vargari had prepared a champion plated in obsidian armor. The Grylth brought a warlord with blades grafted into his limbs. Even the amphibians had chosen a psychic matriarch. The chamber lights dimmed. Vault doors parted with a hiss, and the ground shook as three dragon constructs emerged, scales glittering with living metal, eyes glowing like dying stars. Their roars rattled the bones of every delegate. The Vargari champion strode forward confidently, raising his blade. The dragons ignored him. The Grylth warlord shrieked a challenge. The dragons turned their heads away. The Saurolan matriarch extended her psychic tendrils, only to be dismissed with a contemptuous flick of a tail. Then the dragons faced Elara. For a long, silent moment, she simply blinked at them. "Oh! Are you looking at me?" The largest dragon lowered its head. Its wings folded in reverence. One by one, all three bowed. The chamber erupted. "Impossible!" the insectoid screamed. "Blasphemy!" the amphibians croaked. The Vargari general slammed his fists into the table hard enough to dent alloy. "A glitch! The seals are broken!" Elara tilted her head, as though puzzled. She raised her hand experimentally, and the dragon's massive pupils tracked the gesture. She wiggled her fingers. The colossus mimicked the motion with its talons, scraping gouges into the floor. Her lips quirked in mock embarrassment. "Well, that wasn't in the itinerary." A nervous laugh scattered through the human delegation. The aliens did not laugh. They stared at her as if the air had shifted, as if something had gone wrong with the laws of nature. The insectoid envoy buzzed in alarm. "Dragons choose predators. She is no predator." She tripped on a stair. Elara's smile brightened. "And yet here we are." General Zurok stood, towering above her. His voice thundered through the chamber. "This is fraud. A fragile child cannot command dragons." The nearest dragon snapped its head toward him, lips peeling back to reveal a furnace glow. The general froze as the heat of a miniature star washed over him. Elara set her teacup down delicately. "General, I would tread carefully. My new friends are sensitive about manners." The dragon exhaled, not fire but steam, curling around Zurok in warning. The chamber was silent except for the hiss. Elara leaned back in her chair, her voice honey-sweet. "Please don't take offense. I'm certain you're very strong. But perhaps strength isn't the only measure." The council erupted in argument, voices crashing like a storm. Some demanded the ritual be repeated. Others argued that prophecy foretold such an outcome. A few, those who had seen humanity's eyes a little too long, remained silent, troubled. Elara watched it all with calm amusement, swirling the last sip of her tea. Outwardly, she remained the picture of innocence. Inwardly, her thoughts were already 3 moves ahead, assessing how quickly the dragons could be deployed, how far human fleets would need to move to exploit the confusion. She tapped her finger against the cup, a rhythm no one else recognized. But far above, in the shadows of orbit, human ships adjusted course ever so slightly. Elara rose gracefully, every eye upon her. "It seems," she said softly, "that the dragons have made their choice." Her smile widened, bright, harmless, almost sweet. "Shall we see where it leads?" Chapter 2, Whispers and Shadows. The council chamber emptied like a theater after a dull performance. Delegates filed out in clattering waves, robes dragging, mandibles twitching, scales clicking. No one spared Elara a glance. Why bother with the weakest princess? She remained seated, hands folded neatly on the polished obsidian desk, a faint smile playing at her lips. The council thought she hadn't noticed their side glances, the whispered bets on how quickly she'd be married off to cement someone else's treaty. They were wrong. She noticed everything. Admiral Corrin lingered behind her, arms folded across his chest. The human officer had endured decades of alien condescension and carried the scars of it in his sharp eyes. "They underestimate you," he said at last. "They underestimate all of us," Elara replied softly. She rose, her silver dress catching the chamber's dim light. "That has always been our advantage." The palace on Zetries Prime was a sprawling wonder of glass spires and living crystal. At night, its corridors glowed with bioluminescence, pulsing like veins of a sleeping giant. Elara walked them alone, trailing her fingers along the walls. Her thoughts circled back to the Vargari, the warlike reptilians who had scoffed at her presence earlier. Their ambassador had nearly laughed outright when she spoke of balance and cooperation. He had promised that his fleets would cleanse the weak, starting with humanity. How predictable! She paused by a wide balcony. Beyond, the alien city sprawled in layers of light, alive with species from every corner of the spiral arm. Traders hawked neon fruits that smoked in the cold night air, warriors in gleaming armor clashed in practice bouts, and mercenaries drank until dawn. To them, humans were little more than clever pets, curious, fragile, ultimately harmless. Harmless, she whispered, almost amused. "Princess?" The voice came from the shadows. A figure stepped forward, cloaked in scaled fabric that shimmered faintly like oil on water. His features were indistinct until he moved closer, elongated face, golden eyes, faint ridges across his brow. Not human. Elara didn't flinch. "And you are?" "A friend," he said. His voice carried the rhythm of smoke curling in a cold room. "Or perhaps a messenger. Depends on whether you listen." "I usually do," Elara said. "But rarely to friends who appear uninvited." He chuckled softly. "Then let's say I represent those who watch from the edges. Those who remember." "Remember what?" The stranger leaned closer, his golden eyes unblinking. "That dragons choose carefully." Elara's pulse quickened, though she didn't allow it to touch her face. "Fairy tales," she said lightly. "Stories for frightened children." "Stories," he agreed. "But stories have roots. And roots dig deep." Before she could respond, the man melted back into the darkness. One moment he was there, the next only the night wind remained. Elara exhaled slowly, her mind racing. Dragons. Of course she'd heard the myths, immense beings older than empires, sleeping beneath the stars, choosing champions once in 1,000 generations. Every culture dismissed them as superstition. Every culture except, perhaps, those who feared they might be real. The next day brought another round of humiliation. During a session, the Vargari ambassador openly mocked her again. "Humanity clings to dreams like hatchlings cling to eggshells," he growled. "Weakness dressed as diplomacy." Laughter rippled across the chamber. Elara waited until it subsided, then tilted her head. "And yet," she said sweetly, "hatchlings grow teeth." The chamber quieted. For an instant, the ambassador faltered, as if uncertain whether she had just threatened him. But the moment passed, and the laughter resumed. Still, Admiral Corrin caught her eye from across the chamber. He recognized the tone, the razor edge behind her gentle words. That night, she dreamed, or perhaps not. She walked through a cavern lit by veins of molten gold. The air trembled with heat. Something vast shifted in the darkness, and two eyes like burning suns opened before her. "You wear the mask well," a voice rumbled, not spoken but pressed directly into her mind. Elara held her ground. "And you are?" The cavern shook as the creature's massive head lowered into the light. A maw lined with teeth the size of swords, scales etched with runes that glowed faintly. "A dragon, unmistakable. Asterisk, we are older than your stars. We are patience made flesh. We choose rarely, and only those who walk unseen until the moment they strike, asterisk." "Why me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Because they call you weak," the dragon answered. "And weakness is the finest camouflage." When Elara woke, her chambers were still warm, as if fire had passed through. By morning, rumors had spread. The Vargari fleet was massing on the outer rim, preparing to make their point in blood. Delegates buzzed with fear, whispering about which species would be cleansed first. Humanity, of course, was at the top of every list. In the strategy chamber aboard the human flagship, Admiral Corrin laid out the reports. "They mean to hit us hard, quickly. They think it will collapse morale before we can rally allies. Will it? Elara asked. He studied her. Not if you have a plan. And I think you do. Her gaze lingered on the holographic map of stars, then on the amber ring that marked the Vargari fleet. I don't intend to rally allies, she said softly. I intend to bait predators. Corin raised an eyebrow. Into what? Elara allowed herself the smallest smile. A dragon's den. That evening, as the sun bled crimson across Zetri's prime, Elara stood on the balcony once again. The stranger in the scaled cloak appeared beside her, silent as smoke. You've been chosen, he said simply. Her heart skipped, though her voice remained calm. Then the stories are true. They always were, he replied. But truth hides better in laughter. Are you ready to stop laughing? Elara looked out at the stars, where enemy fleets gathered like storm clouds. Her hands tightened on the railing. Yes, she whispered. Let them come. When the dragons rise, the galaxy will learn what humanity truly is. The stranger bowed once, then vanished into the night. Above, for the briefest instant, the outline of wings blotted out the stars. Chapter 3, Fire in the Void. The declaration of war came without ceremony. General Zurok stood before the assembled council at dawn, his scaled hide gleaming with oils of battle. His voice thundered across the crystalline chamber. The Vargari Empire will not be ruled by a fragile child and her mechanical beasts. We march now. Humanity will burn. Some delegates cheered. Others recoiled. The insectoids clicked with approval, the amphibians whispered warnings. Elara, seated calmly with her tea, raised one brow as if he had just announced a weather forecast. How dramatic, she murmured. Next you'll tell us you've written poetry about my downfall. Zurok ignored her. The Vargari fleet departs within the hour. By this time tomorrow, Earth itself will kneel. Elara set her cup down, her tone syrup sweet. General, do be careful. Announcing your battle plans publicly is bold. The council erupted in noise again, but Zurok was already storming from the chamber, flanked by armored guards. The summit fractured, delegates rushing to prepare. War was no longer rumor, it had begun. From her balcony, Elara watched the first Vargari ships lift into orbit. Great black holes bristling with weapons punched through the atmosphere, engines burning bright. The dragons stirred behind her, wings rustling, scales catching the light. Shall we? One rumbled. Elara smoothed her gown, face serene. Patience. A net works best when the prey walks willingly inside. A voice crackled through her calm Admiral Corin. Confirmation, Vargari fleet en route. 80 warships, full carrier support. They believe they're striking first. Elara's lips curved faintly. Excellent. Let them. Hours later, the void between worlds flared with light. The Vargari fleet swept forward in tight formation, weapons primed. At their head sailed Zurok's flagship, a spear of obsidian steel. On the bridge, he stood tall, claws gripping the rail. Target the human world. Burn it clean. His crew roared assent. Then space itself shifted. One by one, human vessels flickered into view, sleek ships gliding from the darkness, no grandiose flare, no drumbeat of power. They were simply there, positioned in a lattice that closed like jaws around the Vargari armada. Panic rippled across enemy comms. They were waiting. Elara's voice joined the channel, calm and cordial. Welcome, General. I do hope your journey was comfortable. Would you care for some turbulence? At her signal, the dragons emerged. They launched from hidden carriers, wings unfolding like banners of fire. Their roars shook comms, vibrating through the hulls of every ship. Weapons lit, plasma breath spilling into the void. The battle began. The Vargari struck first, unleashing barrages of plasma fire. Explosions rippled against human shields. Yet the human formation did not falter, it flexed, adjusted, absorbing the assault with surgical calm. "Return fire," Admiral Corrin ordered. Human ships answered with precision. Missiles streaked, lasers cut through armor, targeting engines and weapon arrays rather than hulls. The Vargari fought with brute force. The humans dismantled them piece by piece. Meanwhile, dragons dug between ships, weaving through fire. One slammed its talons into a cruiser, tearing metal apart like foil. Another exhaled molten plasma across a carrier's launch bay, incinerating fighters before they could deploy. On his bridge, Zurok roared, fury shaking his chest. "They're not warriors, they're butchers. Hold the line." But his line was breaking. Elara observed from her command deck aboard the human flagship. To her officers, she looked calm, almost detached. Yet every command was calculated. "Shift fleet 3 degrees starboard," she instructed softly. "Cut off their retreat vector. Dragons, herd them towards Sector 6. "Yes, like sheep." Her crew obeyed instantly. One young officer glanced at her nervously. "Princess, they'll be trapped against the asteroid field." "Exactly." She smiled faintly. "Even prey understands walls." The trap closed tighter. On the Vargari flagship, alarms shrieked. Screens filled with tactical markers collapsing inward. "General, we're surrounded," cried an officer. Zurok bared his fangs. "Fight to the last. Humanity cannot." His words cut short as a dragon slammed onto the viewport, its massive eyes staring inside. Heat shimmered across the glass. Then Alara's voice returned, as clear as if she stood beside him. "General, I must commend your bravery. Charging into a snare so confidently, it's almost artistic." "Unfortunately, art does not win wars." Zurok snarled. "You think this ends with one fleet?" "Oh no," Alara replied sweetly. "It ends with all of them." Her signal flashed. Human weapons fired in unison. The Vargari fleet dissolved under the barrage. Ship after ship tore apart in blossoms of fire, debris scattering into the void. Dragons swept through the wreckage, their roars echoing in the comm static. Within minutes, the once mighty armada was gone. Only the flagship remained, crippled and adrift. Elara requested a direct channel. The ruined bridge of the flagship appeared on her holodisplay. Zurok stood among smoke and fire, blood staining his scales. His eyes blazed with fury and fear. "You planned this," he spat. Elara inclined her head politely. "Of course. Did you truly believe humans would stumble into the galaxy without preparation? We've been studying you for decades. Every boast, every insult, every weakness. We let you think us harmless." Her smile widened, sweet as honey. "Predators who roar before they strike are amateurs. True hunters wait. Then they smile." Zurok's breathing came ragged. "You'll make enemies everywhere." "Undoubtedly," Elara agreed. "But tell me, how many empires will rush to war after watching yours disintegrate in an afternoon?" He opened his mouth to reply, but the dragon outside ended the conversation with a single blast of molten fire. The flagship split apart, fragments scattering into the dark. The battle was over. Silence filled Alara's command deck. Officers stared at the screens, stunned. The Vargari, a dominant empire for centuries, had been erased in less than a day. Elara rose slowly. Her gown shimmered under the dim lights, her face composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, the galaxy will be speaking of this for centuries. Let us ensure they use the correct title." She turned toward the viewport where dragons circled triumphantly. Her voice carried across the bridge. Today, humanity shed its mask. Today, the weakest princess became something else entirely. The crew erupted in applause, voices echoing through steel halls. Elara remained silent, her smile faint, her eyes cold. She knew applause would not last forever. The galaxy would regroup. Alliances would form. But the first blow had landed, and it had landed perfectly. Above the wreckage, the dragons wheeled in orbit, shadows against the stars. For the first time in history, they bowed not to an empire of old but to a human. Elara whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear. Checkmate. Chapter 4, The Dragon Empress. The smoke of battle still drifted across the void. Fragments of the Vargari fleet spun slowly, glinting against starlight. Where once had been 80 warships, only debris remained, scattered like ash on water. On the human flagship, silence lingered long after the guns quieted. Officers whispered to one another, as if afraid their voices might break the fragile moment. Princess Elara stood at the viewport, her reflection haloed by firelight. Her hands folded loosely behind her back. She did not smile. At last Admiral Corrin broke the stillness. The Vargari are finished. Messages are already spreading across the network. Half the galaxy is in shock. Elara tilted her head slightly. And the other half? They're afraid. She nodded once, as if she had expected nothing else. Good. Fear is the foundation of order. Respect comes later. The Council on Zetri's Prime reconvened in emergency session. The chamber was half empty now, many delegates had fled. Those who remained carried the weight of survival in their eyes. Elara entered not as the fragile princess but as something sharper. The dragons followed, their massive forms pressing against the chamber walls, talons screeching faintly across crystal floors. Every envoy fell silent. The amphibian chancellor spoke first, his voice hoarse. You destroyed the Vargari. Entire fleets erased. Does humanity intend to rule us all? Elara lowered herself gracefully into her seat, smoothing her gown as if this were a tea party. Her tone was light, almost apologetic. Rule? Such a crude word. We prefer coordination. Someone must bring order to this chaos. Unfortunately, volunteers are scarce. The insectoid envoy hissed, wings trembling. You were weak. Powerless. This is trickery. Elara's gaze flicked to him. She spoke softly, each syllable precise. Weakness was the mask. You gave us centuries to study you, to measure your pride, to map your blind spots. You mistook patience for fragility. That is your failure, not ours. The envoy recoiled, mandibles clattering. Elara leaned back in her chair. We never denied our faults. Clumsy, quarrelsome, far too attached to caffeine. But predators are not defined by elegance. They are defined by results. And you have seen the result. The dragons shifted behind her, as if to punctuate her words. Their eyes burned across the chamber, daring anyone to disagree. After the session, Elara walked the crystal corridors alone, the dragons gliding silently at her side. Their leader, a massive construct whose scales glowed with molten veins, lowered its head to her. You were the mask well, it rumbled in her mind. Elara's lips curved faintly. Masks are necessary. They make the reveal so much more satisfying. The dragon's eyes narrowed. You are dangerous even to us. She touched its jaw, unflinching despite the heat radiating from its body. Perhaps. But danger commands loyalty. You chose me for a reason. We chose because you were what others fear most, the dragon replied. Not strength. Not fire. calculation. Then you chose correctly, she whispered. That evening, the humans celebrated quietly aboard their flagship. Officers raised glasses, toasting survival and victory. Yet beneath the cheer ran a current of unease. They had seen their princess turn entire fleets into wreckage with calm precision. One young officer dared to approach her. "Your Highness, may I ask something?" Elara turned, expression soft. "Of course." He hesitated. Was this always the plan? To provoke them? To let them underestimate us? Then, he gestured helplessly toward the stars littered with debris. Her smile was almost kind. Yes. The trap required bait. I played the part gladly. A weak princess is far more convincing than a strong one. But the dragons, did we know? Not entirely, she admitted. But probabilities favored us. They choose predators, and humanity has always been one. We simply hit our teeth. The officer swallowed hard. And if they hadn't chosen you? Her tone remained gentle, but her words cut sharp. Then we would have found another way. We always do. The officer nodded shakily and withdrew. Elara returned to her viewport. Her reflection stared back, calm eyes, faint smile, the mask once again in place. But behind the glass, stars shivered as human fleets shifted silently into new formations. The next morning, messages flooded in. Some empires offered immediate surrender, desperate to survive. Others begged for alliances, cloaking fear in the language of diplomacy. A few raged, calling for vengeance, but none dared move yet. Admiral Corrin brought her the reports. We've rattled them all. The galaxy is off balance. Excellent, Elara said. That is when empires fall most easily. He studied her, the lines on his face deepening. And when humans rise? Her smile sharpened. Exactly. Later, a private communication came from the insectoid block. Their leader's mandibles clicked nervously on the projection. Princess Elara, humanity must restrain itself. War breeds ruin. If you continue. She interrupted softly, almost apologetically. If we continue? My dear, we already have. The Vargari were not the first empire to underestimate us. They were merely the first to do so publicly. The insectoid stiffened. What are you saying? Elara leaned closer, her voice velvet. Your supply routes. Your hidden bases. Your allies you thought invisible. We've been inside all of it for years. Did you truly think the weakest species survived by chance? The delegate froze, his wings trembling audibly. Elara ended the transmission with a gentle smile. That night, Elara stood on the balcony of her quarters. The dragons circled above the crystalline towers, their shadows blotting out the stars. The city below glowed with uneasy silence, as if every soul on Zetri's prime held its breath. Admiral Corrin joined her quietly. They're already calling you something new, he said. Not princess. Not tactician. Dragon Empress. Elara's eyes lingered on the horizon. A crown forged from fire and fear. Not the one I was born to wear, but perhaps the one humanity requires. Corrin was silent for a long moment. Finally he asked, and when the galaxy unites against us? Elara's lips curved into a smile, bright, disarming, deadly. Then we remind them why predators who hide their teeth hunt best. The dragons roared overhead, their voices merging with the hum of distant fleets. For centuries, the galaxy had mocked humanity as fragile, clumsy, harmless. That illusion was gone now, replaced by a truth far more terrifying. Elara closed her eyes briefly, savoring the weight of it. Then she whispered, soft as a prayer, sharp as a blade. They will kneel. All of them. And to think, They once called me the weakest.